Okay, everyone. Now we're nearing a different part of chapter 5, which is our prefrontal cortex. So, our prefrontal cortex, let's get a quick anatomical visual of this. Is okay, so say this is our brain from the side view, right? That's a horrendous try. Works. Um, so your prefrontal cortex is located at the tip of the brain, right? Like right about here. And its main function is executive function, right? So it works like what is executive function? Executive function is like the way our brain does its big person thinking, right? Like I like to think about it like planning, decision making, all of this stuff is executive function, and the CEO, since the brain is like the prefrontal cortex tip is at the tip of the brain, it's at the top of the brain. It's the CEO, and it works for the executive, right? Like the executive stamp. It works for executive function. So there are three parts to executive function: shifting, working memory, and inhibition. So inhibition is the process of stopping, right? Like that's what we know. Inhibition, like I inhibited an action, I stopped it from happening. So basically, the reason this part of executive function is because little kids have no filter. We know this, right? So why? Because their prefrontal cortex and the region of the brain that's associated with stopping unwanted actions is not fully developed yet. That's why it's a joke, right? Kids have no filter, kids have no self-control. They're not able to stop themselves. So I'm sure you've seen that example where kids get like where kids basically play a game called Lucia's hand game, where they're given a rule, right? Like, okay, if I put out a fist, you put out two fingers. If I put out two fingers, you put out a fist. So what this game does is it basically tests a toddler's ability to use inhibition, right? Like, okay, if I see a fist, I have to stop myself from putting out a fist and I have to put out two fingers instead, right? And it also is seen like when people are like, so when I'm in a classroom, the toddler has to learn to raise their hand instead of blurting out immediately what comes to mind. So that stopping and self-discipline is what's known as inhibition. Then there's something called working memory. So this is your brain's ability to store information temporarily or while you're using it, right? So like I can remember a phone number, or I can remember like 1,007,852,052, yeah, 5,920 in my mind, that number while I'm using it, and then I forget it. So basically what people have learned is that the prefrontal cortex activates in short bursts with that piece of information to keep that memory alive while you're using it. And then once you stop using it, your prefrontal cortex just stops. Then there's this thing called shifting, which is basically your ability to move from one task to another, right? So a common example of this is a card sorting game where basically you're given a rule to sort out all the cards by like say the red cards in one pile, right? And then in the middle they're gonna tell you, okay, stop that and now sort all the cards by number, like in number order, like from ace one, two, three, no, ace two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. And then they'll tell you to shift again and to sort it by alternating colors. So red, black, red, black, red, black. And the reason this is so important is because toddlers have a hard time doing this. Like a 3-year-old is not able to work at the same level as a 4-year-old is, right? Because they don't know how to shift from one task to stop a task and move to the next one. That's a really crucial part of our life if you think about it, because that's what we do on a daily basis. We don't do everything altogether, we stop and then we move to the next one. And often these tasks have no correlation to each other. Like right now, I'm talking to you about all of prefrontal cortex, and the next thing I'm gonna go down and do is make myself breakfast, right? So they have no correlation with each other. Um, and another thing is that all of these functions become, as a toddler, you're not able to do these because you don't have practice with it. But as you become in your mid-adolescence, your tasks become so much more better and fine-tuned. And then when you become an adult, it's like optimal peak, right? Like you can do these tasks mindlessly, brainlessly, and with the highest efficiency possible. So this leads me to the final point. As activity levels, as your age increases, your activity levels required to do each of these tasks decreases. So that's counterintuitive, right? Like as your age increases, you would expect it to be like, oh, shouldn't you have more activity because you use it more? No, because when you do something more efficiently, what does it mean to do something efficiently? It means to do the same task with the less amount of work. So in our brain, I'll introduce this, but I won't go fully into it because that's more of a chapter 7 and 6 thing. Wrong side, haha. So first, when our brain forms connections, right? Say these are all my neurons, right? The connections it forms are like super duper extensive and unnecessary, right? Like it forms connections literally everywhere, right? More, 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 right? But your brain doesn't actually need all of these connections. So as you grow older, your brain will reinforce certain connections, right? While causing all the other ones to just die off. This is called synaptic pruning, right? Like it trims down the information that it needs. So when you have more connections, obviously you'll need more energy, more activity, right? But once you start taking those down, once you start cutting down on all of these, your brain doesn't need it anymore. Your brain basically just it needs less energy to do the same task with in a better way. So that's why as age increases, your synaptic pruning increases, which means that the energy required for that same task goes down because your brain is able to do that same task in a lot more efficient way. Okay, I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, again, just email me, comment down below. I'll be sure to respond to everything. Thank you for watching, guys. Bye bye.